Edward, in a moment of fury, made the most terrible decision of his life, to fire the only person who truly loved his girls. What happened next, he never saw coming. His own daughters would teach him the most painful lesson he ever imagined. Montgomery Manor shuddered with a slamming door that echoed through all the marble like thunder. Edward Montgomery, his face distorted by fury, descended the stairs 2 at a time, his voice cutting through the morning air like a knife. "Chloe, come here immediately." In the backyard, where golden sunbeams filtered through the leaves of ancient oak trees, Chloe Harrison looked up from the small sandcastle she was building with Isabel and Sophie. The three stood motionless, as if time itself had decided to stop before the coming storm. "Daddy sounds really angry," Sophie whispered, her big eyes filling with tears as she clung to Chloe's arm. The 5-year-old had learned to recognize those tones, the same ones that preceded nights of silent crying. Isabel, with the premature wisdom of her 8 years, stood protectively in front of her younger sister. "Don't worry, Soph. Chloe hasn't done anything wrong," but there was something in her voice, a barely perceptible crack that revealed her own fear. Edward's furious footsteps echoed closer and closer. Chloe wiped the sand from her hands with slow, deliberate movements, as if every extra second could prepare the girls for what was coming. In her 2 years caring for the little Montgomery girls, she had seen Edward in many states. Stressed, distant, melancholic, but never like this. Never with that coldness that chilled the soul. "Ladies, please go inside," Chloe murmured, with a forced smile that failed to hide the tremor in her voice. "No!" cried Sophie, clinging tighter. "We don't want Daddy to yell at you. You're nice." Edward appeared in the sliding door frame, and the image he presented was devastating. His perfectly combed hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and in his eyes there was something Chloe had never seen, a coldness that pierced her like an ice dagger. Isabel, Sophie, inside. "Now." "But Daddy, we were playing with Chloe, and—" Isabel began. "I said inside." Edward's roar made even the birds in the trees take flight in a flurry of wings. The girls flinched as if they had been slapped. Sophie began to cry, those heartbreaking sobs that can only come from a frightened child's chest. "I don't want to." "Chloe, don't go." Chloe slowly stood up, instinctively placing herself between Edward and the girls. "Mr. Montgomery, please don't yell at them. They haven't done anything." "Oh no?" Edward's laugh was like broken glass. "They haven't done anything? Then how do you explain my 8-year-old knowing more about finances than some of my employees? How do you explain Isabel asking me yesterday why her Uncle Richard says Daddy is going to lose everything?" The color drained from Chloe's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me." Edward took a step closer, and for the first time in 2 years, Chloe felt real fear. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't know you've been listening to my phone calls? That you've been filling my daughters' heads with information that doesn't concern them?" Isabel stepped forward with a heartbreaking bravery. "Daddy, stop! Chloe hasn't done anything wrong. We ask her questions because you're never here." The silence that followed was deafening. Edward stared at his daughter as if she had plunged a sword into his chest. The truth, spoken by a child's innocent voice, echoed through the garden more loudly than all his shouts. "Get out," Edward murmured, but his voice trembled. "Chloe, get out of my house." "Sir, please, can we talk? Get out." The explosion was so violent that even Helen, the housekeeper, came running from the kitchen. "You have 1 hour to pack your bags and leave, and I never want to see you near my daughters again." What happened next was etched into the memory of all present, like a wound that would never heal. Sophie lunged at Chloe with a cry that seemed to come from the depths of her broken soul. "No, Chloe, you can't go. She loves us. She really does." Isabel, tears streaming down her cheeks, stood in front of her father with a determination that chilled his blood. "Daddy, if Chloe leaves, we're leaving too." Edward staggered, as if he had received a physical blow. "Isabel, don't talk nonsense." "It's not nonsense," the girl cried, her voice breaking between sobs. "Chloe is the only one who hugs us when we have nightmares, the only one who comes to our school plays, the only one who knows how I like my sandwiches and that Sophie is afraid of the dark." Helen covered her mouth with her hands, tears running down her wrinkled face. In 15 years working for the Montgomery family, she had never witnessed something so heartbreaking. Chloe knelt down and hugged the 2 girls, her own heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. "My darlings, you have to be brave. Yes, you have to take care of each other. Don't go," Sophie pleaded between sobs. "Please, Chloe, you promised you'd always be here." "Sometimes adults make mistakes, Princess," Chloe whispered, her voice choking. "But you'll be all right. Edward watched the scene with an inscrutable expression. Something inside him broke at the pure pain in his daughter's eyes, but his wounded pride was stronger than reason. 1 hour, he repeated in a harsh voice, turning away. And don't you dare try to contact my daughters ever again. As Edward walked away towards the house, he didn't see what everyone else did. Isabel lifted her tear-stained face and whispered something that would change everything forever. Then we'll find you, Chloe. Daddy won't separate us from you, I promise. 3 days had passed since Chloe had last walked through the front door of Montgomery Manor, and the house seemed to have lost all its warmth. The hallways echoed empty, the gardens remained without laughter, and a heavy silence, like a tombstone, had settled in every corner. Isabel had not spoken to her father since that terrible day. Not a word, not even when he tried to approach her during meals. His elder daughter looked at him with eyes that seemed like two wells of infinite disappointment. Sophie, for her part, had developed a heartbreaking routine. Every morning she woke up asking if Chloe had returned, and every night she cried herself to sleep hugging the blanket that smelled of Chloe's perfume. The girls aren't eating well, Mr. Edward, Helen informed him that morning as she served breakfast in the main dining room. The housekeeper, who had practically raised Edward since he was a child, was the only one who dared to address him with a certain familiarity. Isabel barely took 2 bites yesterday. And Sophie? What about Sophie? Edward asked without looking up from his newspaper, though the letters blurred before his eyes. She's been asking for the same story that Chloe used to read to her before bed. But when I try to read it, Helen paused, her voice trembling slightly. She says it doesn't sound the same, that only Chloe knew how to do the voices correctly. Edward slammed the newspaper shut. The dark circles under his eyes revealed that he, too, had not slept well for 3 nights. They'll get used to it. Children are resilient. With all due respect, sir. Helen took a step closer. But you are mistaken. These girls have already lost too much in their short lives. The veiled reference to Marie-Hélène, his deceased wife, hit Edward like a slap. Helen, I'd appreciate it if you didn't interfere in matters that are not. Daddy! Sophie's desperate cry interrupted the conversation. Both ran to the second floor, where they found the 5-year-old girl in the hallway, completely hysterical, while Isabel tried to calm her. It's gone! It's gone forever! Sophie sobbed, holding in her little hands the fake pearl necklace Chloe had given her to play princesses. The necklace broke, and now Chloe will never come back. Edward knelt in front of his youngest daughter, feeling as if someone was squeezing his heart with an iron fist. Sophie, my love, it's just a necklace. Daddy can buy you a new one. I don't want a new one, the girl cried, rejecting his arms. I want Chloe's, and I want her to come back and fix it. Isabel watched the scene with an expression that went beyond her 8 years. There was something calculating in her gaze, as if she were analyzing every word, every gesture. When her father tried to approach her too, Isabel took a step back. Isabel, please talk to me, Edward pleaded. I know you're angry with me, but I'm not angry, Isabel replied with a calmness that chilled his blood. I'm disappointed. Chloe taught us the difference. Those words, spoken with the seriousness of a judge, were more devastating than any shout. Edward slowly straightened up, feeling as if he had just aged 10 years in 10 seconds. That night, after Helen finally managed to get Sophie to sleep by singing an out-of-tune lullaby, Isabel stayed awake in her bed. But she wasn't just lying down, she was planning. By the light of her small princess flashlight, Isabel had pulled out a pink notebook Chloe had given her to write her thoughts. On the first page, in her careful second-grader handwriting, she had written, "Plan to find Chloe." Below, she had begun to jot down everything she remembered. Chloe lives in Street, Michael's neighborhood. She takes 2 buses to get here. She likes Mr. Henderson's coffee on the corner. Her mom's name is Mrs. Esperanza, and she's sick. Isabel bit the tip of her pencil, thinking about their nightly conversations. When Chloe helped her with nightmares after her mom died, she had learned a lot about her nanny's life. Chloe never talked about her problems, but Isabel was observant. She had noticed how Chloe sometimes saved part of her lunch for later, how her shoes were worn but always clean, how she answered phone calls with a worried voice when she thought the girls weren't listening. Isabel, a small voice whispered from the next bed. Isabel quickly turned off the flashlight. Sophie, can't you sleep? I miss Chloe, the younger girl murmured. Do you think she misses us too? Isabel quietly got up and slid into her sister's bed. Of course she misses us, silly. Then why doesn't she come back? The question, so simple and devastating, made Isabel feel a tightness in her chest. How to explain to a 5-year-old the complexity of adult pride, stubbornness, fear, Because Daddy won't let her, she finally answered with brutal honesty. Sophie snuggled against her older sister. Can we go look for her? Isabel felt a spark of hope, mixed with determination. Would you want to do that, even if it's difficult? Yes. Sophie immediately sat up, her little eyes shining in the dark. I want to go find Chloe and I want her to come home. Shh, you have to speak softly. Isabel looked towards her bedroom door. This is going to be our secret. Okay? We can't tell Daddy or Helen or anyone because it's a secret. Isabelle thought carefully about her words, because sometimes adults don't understand what really matters. They worry about things that aren't important, like pride and being right. But we know Chloe really loves us, right? Yes, Sophie nodded fervently. Chloe is the best. She does pretty braids for me and knows how to make monster voices that aren't scary. Then we have to bring her back, Isabelle declared, with a determination that would have scared any adult who heard her. But first, I need you to help me remember everything we know about where Chloe lives. For the next hour, the two girls whispered in the dark, sharing every fragment of information they had gathered about their beloved Nanny's life. Sophie remembered that Chloe always bought bread at a bakery called the Golden Wheat. Isabelle knew that Chloe studied at night to be a teacher because she wanted to help more children like us. And once, Sophie whispered, when Daddy yelled on the phone about money, Chloe cried in the bathroom. I saw her and she said something about needing the job for her mom's medicine. Isabelle felt a pang in her heart. Chloe had been worried about money, and her dad had fired her just when she needed it most. Sophie. Isabelle took her younger sister's hands. You trust me always, right? Sophie replied without hesitation. Then tomorrow we're going to start our plan, but you have to promise me you're going to be very, very brave. Can you do that for Chloe? Sophie nodded with such determination that her curls bounced. I promise, I'll be the bravest girl in the whole wide world. Isabelle smiled in the dark. Then we're going to bring Chloe back, and when that happens, our family will be complete again. What neither of the girls knew was that on the other side of the wall, Edward had been standing for the last 10 minutes, listening to every word through the half-open door. His hands trembled as he silently walked away to his own room. For the first time in 3 days, Edward Montgomery cried, but they weren't tears of self-pity, they were tears of painful understanding. His daughters, 8 and 5 years old, were showing more courage and determination than he was. They were willing to do what he couldn't. Admit he had made the biggest mistake of his life. But pride is a powerful demon, and Edward was not yet ready to face it. For now, he could only hold the photograph of his deceased wife and murmur, Marie-Helen, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be the father they need. In the girls' room, Isabelle had pulled out her notebook again, and under the dim light of her flashlight, she wrote the first entry of her plan. Day 1 of the plan. Tomorrow we'll ask Helen about buses without her suspecting anything. The sun had barely begun to filter through the silk curtains when Isabelle woke up with the determination of a general preparing for the most important battle of her life. She had slept barely 3 hours, but her mind was more awake than ever. Today would begin the riskiest mission an 8-year-old girl could imagine. Sophie was still sleeping soundly, hugging Chloe's broken necklace to her chest. Isabelle watched her for a moment, feeling a mixture of tenderness and responsibility that tightened her heart. Her little sister trusted her completely, and that trust was both a gift and an immense burden. Sophie, Isabelle whispered, gently touching her sister's shoulder. It's time to begin. The younger girl woke instantly, as if she had been waiting for that signal. Are we going to look for Chloe now? Shh. Isabelle looked towards the door. First, we have to do reconnaissance. Remember what we talked about last night? Sophie nodded solemnly. I have to act normal, but ask smart questions. Exactly. And if someone asks something strange, what do you say? That I'm just curious because I miss Chloe. Isabelle smiled proudly. Her little sister was smarter than adults believed. Perfect. Let's go for breakfast. When they went down to the dining room, they found Edward already seated at the table, but there was something different about him. The dark circles were more pronounced, his posture less upright, and there was a sadness in his eyes that the girls had not seen before. Helen served the coffee with mechanical movements, the general atmosphere of the house heavy like a damp blanket. Good morning, princesses, Edward murmured, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Isabelle sat down without responding, but Sophie, with the innocence of her 5 years, approached her father. Daddy, do you miss Chloe too? The question dropped like a stone into still water. Edward choked on his coffee, and Helen dropped the serving spoon with a metallic clang. Sophie, my love. Daddy is fine, Edward lied, but his voice cracked slightly. But you look sad, Sophie insisted. studying her father's face with that brutal honesty that only children possess. Chloe used to tell us that when someone looks sad, it's because they need a hug. Isabel watched the interaction with scientific attention. She could see how Sophie's words pierced her father's defenses like accurate arrows. It was valuable information for her plan. Edward extended his arms towards Sophie, and the girl snuggled against him. For a moment, father and daughter remained embraced in silence. But Isabel noticed something crucial. Her father's hands were trembling. "Helen," Isabel suddenly said, "how do people get to Street, Michael's neighborhood, from here?" The housekeeper turned, surprised. "Why do you ask that, child?" Isabel had rehearsed this answer. "At school, we're studying about the different neighborhoods in the city, and I remembered Chloe mentioned she lived there." Edward visibly tensed upon hearing Chloe's name, but he said nothing. Helen sat next to Isabel, her expression softening. "Well, it's a long trip, little one. You have to take 2 buses. The first from the stop near the Americas Mall. And then..." Isabel absorbed every word like a sponge, memorizing routes, street names, important references. Sophie, intuitively understanding her role, added seemingly innocent questions. "And how long does it take, Mrs. Helen?" "Almost 2 hours, my dear. That's why Chloe had to get up so early to get here." Edward shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That information was new to him too, and something in his expression suggested that every detail about Chloe's sacrifices was like a new wound. "And is it dangerous to go alone?" Isabel asked with genuine concern. "For a little girl like you, yes, it would be dangerous," Helen replied firmly. "But Chloe knows the way well. She's been making that trip for 2 years. Since Mommy died." Sophie's question made silence fall like a tombstone over the table. Edward abruptly stood up, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "I'm done with breakfast. Helen, make sure the girls don't leave the house unsupervised." And with that, he left, leaving a trail of palpable tension in the air. Helen watched the girls with a mixture of worry and understanding. "Little ones, your daddy is going through a very difficult time." "Why did he fire Chloe if that makes him sad?" Sophie asked, with the crushing logic of children. The housekeeper sighed deeply. "Sometimes adults make mistakes when we're scared or confused, and sometimes our pride prevents us from fixing those mistakes." Isabel processed that information carefully. "Mrs. Helen, do you think Daddy regrets it?" Helen looked in the direction where Edward had disappeared. "I think your daddy is realizing that some things are more important than being right." After breakfast, while Helen was busy with her chores and Edward had locked himself in his office with business calls, the girls went up to their room for the second phase of their plan. Isabel pulled out a city map she had found in her father's library. With a colored pencil, she began to trace the route Helen had described. "Do you think we can make that trip, Isabel?" Sophie asked, watching the lines her sister drew. "We have to be able to," Isabel replied, with fierce determination. "But we need more information, and we need money." "Money for what?" "For the buses, and maybe to buy something for Mrs. Esperanza, Chloe's mom. Helen once said she was sick." Sophie frowned, thinking intensely. "I have money in my birthday piggy bank." Isabel nodded, a pang of pride for her little sister. "I also have some saved, but we need to know exactly how much the bus fare costs." Just then, they heard voices in the hallway. The 2 girls froze, recognizing the voice of Richard, Isabel's uncle, speaking with Edward. "I tell you, firing that girl was the right thing to do, Edward. You had to protect your interests." "Richard, please, not now." "Now, brother, your daughters look devastated. Maybe you should consider." "Consider what?" "Bringing her back after she violated my trust?" Isabel grabbed Sophie's hand, both holding their breath as they listened. "Did she really violate your trust, Edward? Or did you project your paranoia onto an innocent girl who was just doing her job?" The silence that followed was so tense that the girls could feel it even from their room. "My daughters haven't spoken to me in 4 days, Edward continued, his voice sounding defeated. "Isabel looks at me like I'm a stranger. Sophie cries every night, and I don't know how to fix this." "Then fix it," Richard said firmly. "Find that girl, apologize, and bring her back. It's not that simple." Another long pause. When Edward spoke again, his voice was laden with a vulnerability the girls had rarely heard. "Because if I admit I was wrong about Chloe, I'll have to admit I've been wrong about many other things too. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that truth." Footsteps faded down the hallway, but the words lingered in the air like ghosts. Isabel turned to Sophie, her eyes shining with new determination. "Did you hear that?" "Daddy knows he made a mistake," Sophie whispered. "But he's too scared to fix it," Isabel completed. "Then we have to be braver than him. Isabel returned to her notebook and wrote a new entry. Day 4 of the plan. Daddy knows he made a mistake, but he needs help to be brave. Tomorrow we're going to the Americas Mall to investigate the buses. If Helen asks, we'll say we want to buy something for Father's Day, which is coming up. Sophie watched her sister write, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. Isabel, do you think Chloe will forgive us for taking so long to find her? Isabel put down the pencil and looked at her younger sister with a seriousness that went beyond her years. Chloe forgives everyone, Sophie. She truly loves us. That's why we have to bring her back, not just for us, but to teach Daddy what it means to love unconditionally. That night, while Edward remained awake in his office looking at family photos where Chloe appeared smiling with his daughters, the Montgomery girls slept in each other's arms, dreaming of the day their family would be complete again. But what neither of them knew was that Chloe, in her small apartment in Street Michael's neighborhood, also remained awake, wiping tears from a letter of recommendation she had begun to write to find a new job. In the depths of her heart, she too hoped for a miracle. The Americas Mall buzzed with the typical activity of a Saturday morning. Entire families strolled between stores, children ran through the aisles, and the aroma of coffee and pastries wafted from the restaurant area. To any casual observer, Isabel and Sophie Montgomery seemed like two more girls enjoying a weekend outing with their housekeeper, but the reality was much more complex and dangerous. Remember, girls, Helen told them as they walked towards the toy store, you have exactly 1 hour to choose your dad's gift. After that, we have to go home for lunch. Isabel nodded with a smile she had practiced in front of the mirror that morning. Of course, Mrs. Helen. We just want to find something special for Daddy. What Helen didn't know was that the gift for Dad was simply a cover-up. Isabel's real objective was 200 meters away, the bus stop Helen had mentioned days earlier. Sophie, Isabel whispered when Helen was distracted looking at a jewelry store window. Remember what your job is? The 5-year-old nodded solemnly. I have to keep Mrs. Helen busy while you go investigate the buses. Exactly. And if something goes wrong, I'll pretend I feel sick and start crying so you have time to come back. Isabel felt both proud and terrified. Her younger sister had become her perfect accomplice, but the enormity of what they were planning was beginning to overwhelm her. They were talking about running away from home, traveling alone across the city, looking for someone in a neighborhood they didn't know. It was crazy, but it was also their only hope. Helen, Sophie said suddenly, with that manipulative sweetness that only small children can master. Can we go see the puppies at the pet store? Please, please, please. Helen melted immediately. Of course, my love, but we just look, okay? Your dad doesn't want pets in the house. As Helen and Sophie headed towards the pet store, Isabel felt her heart race. She had perhaps 10 minutes before her absence would be noticed. 10 minutes to get the information she needed. With steps she tried to keep casual, Isabel walked towards the mall exit. The mid-morning sun hit her like a wall of heat, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the bus stop, where several people waited under the shade of a tin roof. Excuse me, sir. Isabel approached an elderly man reading the newspaper. Do you know how much the fare is to Street Michael's neighborhood? The man lowered his newspaper and looked at her curiously. Street Michael's neighborhood? That's quite far from here, child. Where are your parents? Isabel had rehearsed this answer too. My mom is shopping in the mall. We're visiting my grandma next week, and she wants to know how much money to bring. The explanation seemed to satisfy the man. Well, you have to take 2 buses. The first one costs $8 and takes you to the central terminal. There you take the second one, which costs $12, to Street Michael's. But the trip is long, like 2 hours in total. Isabel memorized every word. $20 per person. One way. That meant $40 just to get there, plus $40 to return. $80 in total. In her piggy bank, she had $73, and Sophie had mentioned she had about $50. It would be tight, but possible. And how often do the buses run? Isabel asked. The first one comes every half hour. The last one for Street. Michael's leaves at 6 inches the evening from the central terminal. Isabel nodded, a pang of panic. If they missed the last bus, they would be stranded in an unknown neighborhood at night. That meant they would have to plan their escape to have enough time to find Chloe and return before 6. Thank you, sir, Isabel murmured, turning to return to the mall. Hey, child, the man called after her. Isabel froze, fearing he had suspected something. Be careful in Street Michael's. It's not the best neighborhood for 2 little girls to be alone. The warning sent a shiver down Isabel's spine, but it also reinforced her determination. If Chloe had been making that dangerous trip every day for 2 years to care for them, then they could be brave once to find her. When she returned to the pet store, she found Sophie completely engrossed watching a golden retriever puppy, while Helen smiled indulgently. "Where were you, Isabel?" Helen asked curiously. "I went to the washroom." Isabel lied without batting an eye. "Can we go look for Daddy's gift now?" For the next hour, as they wandered through the stores looking for an appropriate gift for Edward, Isabel whispered to Sophie the details of her reconnaissance. The information was both hopeful and terrifying. $80. Sophie whispered when Helen walked away to talk to a saleswoman. "That's a lot of money." "But we have it," Isabel replied firmly. "And it's for Chloe. She's worth all the money in the world." They finally decided to buy Edward a navy blue tie that, according to Isabel, matched his sad eyes. It was a gift loaded with symbolism that none of the adults present fully understood. The return trip to the manor passed in tense silence. Isabel pretended to be asleep so she could think without interruption, while Sophie played distractedly with the gift bag. Helen, for her part, something, although none of the girls could guess what. Upon arriving home, they found Edward in the backyard, exactly in the same place where he had fired Chloe 5 days earlier. He was sitting on the wrought iron bench, looking at the unfinished sandcastle the girls had been building with their nanny. "Daddy." Sophie ran to him with the gift in her hands. "We bought you something." Edward received the bag with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When he unwrapped the tie, something in his expression broke slightly. "It's very beautiful, princesses." "Thank you." Isabelle said, "It was the color of your eyes when you're sad." Sophie commented with that brutal honesty that characterized small children. Edward looked at his elder daughter with a mixture of surprise and pain. "My eyes look sad?" Isabelle sat next to her father on the bench. For a moment, her determination wavered when she saw the genuine vulnerability on his face. "Daddy, do you miss Chloe?" The direct question hit Edward like a punch. He remained silent for long seconds, struggling with himself. "Yes," he finally admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I miss her very much." "Then why don't you bring her back?" Sophie asked, climbing onto her father's lap. Edward hugged his younger daughter, feeling his own heart breaking, because sometimes adults make mistakes so big that we don't know how to fix them. "Chloe always told us that asking for forgiveness is the bravest thing a person can do," Isabel murmured. Those words pierced Edward's defenses like a spear. Chloe had been teaching his daughters life lessons that he himself needed to learn. "Do you think Chloe would forgive me?" Edward asked, feeling his voice crack. "Chloe forgives everything," Sophie replied, with absolute certainty. Even when Isabel accidentally broke her favorite mug, Chloe just said that accidents happen and that the important thing was that Isabel was okay. Edward closed his eyes, feeling the crushing weight of his own pride. His daughters were right. Chloe was pure goodness, and he had treated her like a criminal. "Daddy," Isabel's soft voice brought him back to the present. "If you brought Chloe back, we would be the happiest family in the world." Edward looked at his 2 daughters, seeing in their faces a hope so pure that it hurt his soul. "Do you really love her that much?" "More than ice cream," Sophie replied solemnly, which in her 5-year-old world was the deepest declaration of love possible. "More than Disney princesses," Isabel added, not wanting to be outdone. Edward felt tears threaten to spill. His daughters had found in Chloe something he himself had been looking for since Marie Helen's death: unconditional love, infinite patience, and the ability to make a house a home. "You know what?" Edward murmured, making a decision that would change everything. Maybe Daddy should be as brave as you two and find a way to bring Chloe back." The little eyes of both girls lit up as if they had seen the first star of the night. "Really, Daddy?" Sophie whispered. "Really," Edward confirmed, feeling lighter than he had been in days. "But it will take time to find her and find the right words to apologize." Isabel and Sophie exchanged a meaningful glance. They knew exactly where to find Chloe, but they also knew their father needed time to overcome his pride. Maybe, just maybe, they could help him without him realizing it. "Daddy," Isabel said carefully, "we can wait, but not too long. Because Chloe must be sad too." "Not too long," Edward promised, hugging his 2 daughters. "Daddy will fix this somehow." That night, after Edward tucked them in with a tenderness they hadn't experienced since before Chloe's departure, Isabel and Sophie refined their plan in the darkness of their room. "Did you hear what Daddy said?" Isabel whispered. "He's going to look for Chloe, but it's going to take time." "A long time?" Sophie asked, worried. "Probably. Adults are slow about these things, but we can be faster." Isabel pulled out her notebook and wrote under the light of her flashlight. Day 5 of the plan. Daddy finally admitted he misses Chloe and promised to look for her, but we know where she is. Tomorrow is Sunday. Helen goes to church at 10, and Daddy has his business meeting at 11. That's our chance. Tomorrow? Sophie asked, feeling butterflies in her stomach. Tomorrow, Isabel confirmed with fierce determination. We're going to be the bravest girls in the whole wide world. We're going to find Chloe, and we're going to bring her home where she belongs. While the girls planned the riskiest adventure of their short lives, Edward remained awake in his room, looking at a photograph of himself with Marie Helen and the girls in happier days. In that image, taken just a year earlier, Chloe appeared in the background smiling, while Isabel and Sophie played in her arms. Marie Helen, Edward whispered to the photograph, help me have the courage our daughters already have. Help me bring back the person who loves our girls as you love them. Fate, whimsical and mysterious, had set in motion forces that neither Edward nor the girls could imagine. The next day, three hearts desperate to reunite would finally take the path to an encounter that would change their lives forever. Sunday dawned with a clear sky that seemed like a divine promise. Isabel woke with her heart hammering against her ribs like a war drum. Today was the day. After a week of meticulous planning, she would finally launch the most important mission of her life, to bring Chloe back. Sophie was already awake, sitting on her bed, hugging her small princess backpack. Inside, she had secretly packed 3 chocolate cookies, a bottle of water, and her favorite stuffed animal, in case Chloe needed comforting when she saw them. Are you scared? Isabel whispered, as she dressed in the clothes she had carefully selected. Comfortable jeans, walking shoes, and a blouse with pockets where she had hidden the money. A little bit, Sophie admitted, but more excited. Do you think Chloe will be surprised? Isabel smiled for the first time in days with genuine joy. I think she's going to be so happy she'll cry. From downstairs came the familiar sounds of Helen preparing for Sunday church service. The clatter of heels on marble, the jingle of keys, the sound of the closet door closing. Everything was happening exactly as Isabel had observed for weeks. Girls, Helen called from the kitchen. I'm going to church. Your dad is at his business meeting and will be back at noon. Be good, don't leave the house, and if you need anything, call my cell phone. Yes, Mrs. Helen, both girls replied in unison, their voices filled with a feigned innocence that would have fooled anyone. The sound of Helen's car fading into the distance was like the starting gun the girls had been waiting for. Isabel ran to the window and confirmed that the vehicle had completely disappeared down the avenue. Now, Isabel whispered. The two girls ran to the kitchen, where Isabel had previously located the tin, where Helen kept money for minor emergencies. With trembling hands, Isabel took out exactly $80, leaving a note written in her neatest handwriting. Borrowed. We'll pay it back. Isabel and Sophie. Isn't it bad to take money without permission? Sophie asked, as she watched her sister. It's borrowed, not stolen, Isabel explained, although she herself felt a knot in her stomach. And it's for something good, to bring our family back. They left the manor through the back garden gate, the same one Chloe had last exited, with her bags and a broken heart. Isabel had memorized the route to the bus stop. 5 minutes walking through streets she knew perfectly. Then into unknown territory. The sun was already high when they reached the stop, and Isabel felt the first real wave of panic at the number of people waiting. Adults with serious faces, students with huge backpacks, street vendors with their carts, and them, 2 small girls who stood out like flowers in a concrete field. Are you sure you know which bus to take? Sophie whispered, clinging to her sister's hand. Isabel discreetly pointed to a blue and white bus approaching. That one. The man told me I had to look for line 47. When the bus stopped with a screech of brakes and a cloud of black smoke, Isabel felt as if she was about to cross a portal to another world. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, and passengers began to board in a seemingly chaotic mass. 2 tickets, please, Isabel said to the driver, trying to make her voice sound more mature than it was. The driver, a man with a gray mustache and a tired expression, looked at them curiously. Where are your parents, girls? Isabel had rehearsed this answer too. Our grandma is waiting for us at the central terminal. Our parents couldn't come with us because they're working. It was a lie, but a desperate one. The driver studied their faces for what seemed like an eternity, then shrugged and accepted the $16. Sit near the front and don't get separated, he warned them with unexpected kindness. The ride on the first bus was a mixture of terror and fascination. Isabel watched through the window as the familiar city of her childhood gradually transformed into unknown landscapes. Tall, modern buildings gave way to more modest constructions. Manicured gardens became vacant lots, and paved streets began to show potholes and cracks. Sophie remained silent for most of the journey, her big eyes absorbing every detail of this new world unfolding before her. Occasionally, she snuggled closer to Isabelle when the bus braked suddenly, or when particularly intimidating passengers boarded. "Is it much further?" Sophie asked after 40 minutes of travel. Isabelle consulted the map she had drawn in her notebook. The driver said he would tell us when we reached the central terminal. 20 minutes later, the driver shouted, "Central terminal, last stop." Isabelle grabbed Sophie's hand, and they got off the bus into a world completely different from anything they had known. The central terminal was an organized chaos of sounds, smells, and movement. Hundreds of people moved in all directions. Vendors shouted their wares. Buses arrived and departed in a cacophonous symphony of engines and horns. "Isabelle, this is scary," Sophie murmured, pressing against her older sister. "It's just different," Isabelle replied, with more confidence than she felt. "Chloe comes here every day. If she can do it, so can we." Locating the correct bus for street, Michael's neighborhood proved more difficult than Isabelle had anticipated. There were dozens of buses, each with destinations written in small, blurry letters on their windshields. After 20 minutes of searching and several questions to people who seemed to be in a perpetual hurry, they finally found the correct line. The second bus was noticeably older and more dilapidated than the first. The seats had frayed upholstery, the windows were opaque from years of dust and use, and there was a persistent smell of diesel and human sweat. But for Isabelle and Sophie, it could have been a golden chariot, because it was taking them towards Chloe. "How are we going to find Chloe's house when we get there?" Sophie asked, as the bus entered the narrow streets of Street Michael's neighborhood. Isabelle pulled out her notebook and showed a page where she had written down all the information she had managed to gather. "We know she lives near the Golden Wheat Bakery, and Helen once mentioned her house had a green door. If we ask for Mrs. Esperanza, someone will help us." Street. Michael's neighborhood was a world completely different from Montgomery Manor. The houses were small and close together, painted in bright colors that seemed to defy the surrounding poverty. Children played in the streets without adult supervision. Music spilled from open windows, and there was a sense of community that Isabelle had never experienced in her neighborhood of high walls and private gardens. "Golden Wheat stop!" shouted the driver. The girls got off the bus with trembling legs, as much from nerves as from the 2-hour journey. The Golden Wheat Bakery was right across from the stop, exactly as Helen had described, and the aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air with an almost maternal warmth. "Excuse me, sir." Isabelle approached the baker, a robust man with an apron covered in flour. "Do you know Chloe Harrison? She lives nearby with her mom, Mrs. Esperanza." The man's face immediately lit up. "Of course I know Chloe. She's a very good girl. She always buys bread for her mom." "Are you relatives?" "We're special friends," Isabelle replied, technically not lying. "Could you tell us where she lives?" The baker pointed down a narrow street that led away from the main stop. 3 blocks down that street, turn left, and it's the house with the green door. "Number 23. But his expression turned worried. "Are you alone? Where are your parents?" "They're picking us up later." Isabelle lied again, hating to do so, but knowing she had no choice. Following the baker's directions, Isabelle and Sophie walked through streets that seemed straight out of a storybook. There were flowers in makeshift pots, clothes hanging on lines, stretched from window to window, and a sense of authentic life that contrasted dramatically with the sterile perfection of their own neighborhood. "There," Isabelle whispered, pointing to a small, 1-story house with a mint green painted wooden door. "Number 23. Both girls stopped in front of the house, feeling the weight of what they were about to do. They had traveled for hours, they had lied, they had borrowed money, all to reach this moment. "What if Chloe doesn't want to see us?" Sophie suddenly asked, vocalizing the fear Isabelle had been suppressing. "Chloe always wants to see us," Isabelle replied with a conviction that came directly from her heart. "She loves us. She just needs to know that we love her too." Isabelle took a deep breath and knocked on the green door with 3 firm knocks. From inside came sounds of movement, shuffling footsteps, and then the voice they had been desperately missing for a whole week. "Who is it?" "Chloe," Sophie shouted, no longer able to contain herself. "It's us, Isabelle and Sophie. We came to find you." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the sound of locks frantically unlatching, and finally the green door opened to reveal Chloe Harrison. She was different. Her eyes were swollen as if she had been crying. Her hair didn't have its usual careful style, and she wore casual clothes the girls had never seen her in. But her face, the moment she saw them, transformed with such pure and devastating joy that it seemed to radiate its own light. "My girls," Chloe whispered, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. "Is it really you?" "Chloe!" both girls cried in unison, launching themselves into her arms like projectiles of pure love. The impact almost knocked Chloe over, but she received them in an embrace that seemed designed to heal all the world's wounds. The three bodies melted into a circle of love that had been broken for exactly 7 days, 4 hours, and 36 minutes. "How did you get here?" Chloe sobbed, covering their faces with kisses. "Where's your dad? Are you okay?" "My God, I can't believe you're here. We came to find you," Isabel declared through tears. "Because you belong with us, and because Daddy realized he made the biggest mistake of his entire life." Inside the small Harrison family home, Isabel and Sophie discovered a world that contrasted dramatically with the opulence of their mansion, yet radiated a warmth their own home had lost since Chloe's departure. The walls were decorated with family photos, plants in makeshift pots, and small details that spoke of genuine love despite evident economic limitations. On the small, worn but impeccably clean fabric sofa, Chloe couldn't let go of the girls. She held them tightly against her chest as if fearing they would disappear if she let them go. Her tears fell uncontrollably, mixing pure joy with a consuming maternal worry. "My darlings, you can't be here alone," Chloe repeated between sobs. "How did you get here? Does your dad know where you are?" Isabel exchanged a meaningful glance with Sophie before responding. They had rehearsed this conversation, but facing reality was much more complex than their secret plans. "We took 2 buses, Isabel explained with a mixture of pride and nervousness. "And no, Daddy doesn't know we're here. But Chloe," her voice broke slightly. "He misses you a lot," he told us. Chloe's eyes filled with new tears, but these were different. There was pain in them, a deep wound the girls hadn't seen before. "My princesses," Chloe murmured, caressing both girls' faces. "You shouldn't have made such a dangerous trip. Your dad must be very worried." "Daddy's at his business meeting," Sophie explained, with the simple logic of her 5 years. "And Helen's at church. They won't know we're gone until noon." Chloe looked at her cheap wristwatch. It was 11:15 inches the morning. They had less than an hour before the desperate search would begin at Montgomery Manor. "I have to call your house immediately," Chloe declared, getting up from the sofa. "No," Isabel cried, clinging to her arm. "Please, Chloe, listen to us first. We came all this way because you need to know the truth." "The truth about what, my love?" Isabel took a deep breath, preparing for the most important words of her life. "The truth that Daddy was wrong about you. The truth that we know you didn't do anything wrong. The truth that our family is broken without you." At that moment, a weak but loving voice came from the back room of the house. "Chloe, is everything all right, dear?" "It's my mom," Chloe quickly explained. "Mrs. Esperanza, the girls I always talk about are here." An older woman appeared in the doorway of the room, leaning on a makeshift cane. Despite her evident physical fragility, her eyes shone with an intelligence and kindness that immediately reminded them of her daughter. Isabel immediately understood where Chloe had gotten her golden heart. "These are Isabel and Sophie, Mrs. Esperanza asked with a smile that lit up her wrinkled face. "My goodness, they're more beautiful than Chloe told me." "Mrs. Esperanza." Sophie ran to the older woman with the natural confidence that only children possess. "Chloe talks about you. She says you're the wisest grandma in the whole wide world." Mrs. Esperanza's eyes filled with tears. "Chloe has talked about you day and night since she came home. She hasn't stopped crying for a single moment." The confession hit the girls like an emotional slap. Isabel felt a pressure in her chest that almost made it impossible to breathe. "Have you been crying because of us?" Isabel asked, turning to Chloe. Chloe couldn't lie in front of those innocent faces that looked at her with so much love. "Every day, every night. You two are the light of my life." "Then come with us," Sophie pleaded with the crushing logic of a child. "If you miss us and we miss you, just come home." Chloe knelt in front of the 2 girls, taking their little hands in hers. "My loves, it's not that simple. Your dad fired me because he thinks I did something wrong." "But you didn't do anything wrong," Isabel insisted vehemently. "We know the truth, Chloe. We know why Daddy yelled at you." An expression of confusion crossed Chloe's face. "Princess," Isabel looked at Sophie, who nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Daddy heard when Uncle Richard told someone on the phone that Daddy could lose a lot of money in his businesses, but Daddy thought you had overheard and told other people." Chloe froze, processing that information. "But how do you know that?" Because we did hear when Uncle Richard was talking on the phone, Sophie confessed. We were playing hide and seek and we hid behind the big sofa. We heard the whole conversation. The revelation hit Chloe like a lightning bolt. You heard that conversation? It wasn't me. It was never you, Isabel confirmed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daddy was wrong, and when we asked him questions about money, it wasn't because you had told us anything. It was because we had heard Uncle Richard talking about business and big numbers. Mrs. Esperanza sat heavily in a nearby chair, her face reflecting the magnitude of the injustice that had just been revealed. Good heavens, the older woman murmured. My daughter, you were punished for something you didn't do. Chloe covered her face with her hands, sobbing with a mixture of relief and devastating pain. For a whole week she had been tormenting herself, wondering what she had done wrong, how she had failed the girls she loved as her own. Chloe, don't cry, Sophie pleaded, hugging her nanny. We know the truth now. You just have to come with us, so Daddy knows the truth too. It's not that easy, my love, Chloe murmured, wiping her tears. Your dad said very ugly things to me. He yelled at me in front of you. He treated me as if I were a terrible person. But he was wrong, Isabel insisted. And adults can change their minds when they learn the truth, right? At that moment, the house phone began to ring with urgent insistence. The 4 occupants of the small living room looked at each other with panic. It must be your dad, Chloe murmured, heading towards the old telephone hanging on the kitchen wall. Hello? Chloe answered, her voice trembling. The voice that came from the other end of the line was desperate, broken by panic and guilt. Chloe, my God, please tell me my daughters are with you. It was Edward, and he sounded like a man on the verge of emotional collapse. Mr. Montgomery, Chloe replied, her professional training battling her personal emotions. Yes, the girls are here. They're safe. The sound that came from the phone was half sob, half cry of relief. Thank God. How did they get there? Helen called me hysterical, saying they had disappeared. I've been calling the police. Hospitals. Isabel snatched the phone from Chloe's hands. Daddy, don't call the police. We're fine. Isabel. Edward's voice completely broke. Are you insane? How could you do something so dangerous? And Sophie. I'm here, Daddy, Sophie yelled into the phone. And we found Chloe. She's very sad because you scolded her for something she didn't do. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Daddy, Isabel continued, her voice full of a heartbreaking maturity. We came to find Chloe because we know the truth. We know you were wrong, and we know she didn't do anything wrong. What truth? Edward's voice was barely a whisper. Isabel told him the whole story, how they had overheard Uncle Richard's phone conversation, how they had been the ones who had asked questions about money, and how Chloe had been completely innocent from the beginning. When Isabel finished speaking, the silence stretched for long seconds that felt like hours. Finally, Edward spoke, and his voice was laden with guilt and pain so deep that it sent shivers down everyone's spine in the small house. Chloe, he murmured, please put me on speaker. Chloe activated the speaker function with trembling hands. Chloe Harrison, Edward began, and his voice immediately broke. I have made the biggest, cruelest, most unforgivable mistake of my entire life. I accused you of something you didn't do. I yelled at you. I humiliated you in front of my daughters. I fired you when you needed the job most to care for your sick mother. Mrs. Esperanza covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. I cannot ask you to forgive me, Edward continued, because I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I beg you, I implore you, to allow me to come and get you, to let me take you back home where you belong, to let me try to repair even a small part of the damage I have caused. Chloe looked at the phone as if she couldn't believe the words she was hearing. Isabel and Sophie watched her expectantly, their little hearts beating in unison. Mr. Montgomery, Chloe finally replied, her voice trembling. Your daughters are the bravest and most loving people I have ever met in my life. They traveled alone across an unknown city, just to show you that true love knows no obstacles. I know, Edward sobbed. My daughters have taught me a lesson I will never forget. And now, Chloe continued, looking at Isabel and Sophie with a tearful smile. I think it's time for all of us to go home together. The journey back to Montgomery Manor was completely different from the outbound trip Isabel and Sophie had embarked on that morning. Edward had arrived at Street, Michael's neighborhood in record time, driving his black BMW as if his life depended on it, because in many ways it did. His life, his family, his heart, everything depended on being able to repair the damage his pride had caused. When Edward got out of the car in front of the small green-doored house, Isabel and Sophie ran to him with a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had achieved their mission, but now they had to face the consequences of their adventure. "Daddy," Sophie cried, launching into his arms. "We found Chloe, and she says she forgives us for taking so long to find her." Edward hugged his daughters with desperate intensity, as if he wanted to absorb them back into safety. But above their heads, his eyes were fixed on the figure standing in the doorway of the house. Chloe, looking more vulnerable than he had ever seen her, but also more beautiful, because she radiated the dignity of a woman who had been unjustly accused and finally vindicated. "Chloe," Edward murmured, his voice filled with an emotion he hadn't felt since his wife's death. Mr. Montgomery," Chloe interrupted softly. "Before you say anything, I want you to know that I would never, ever do anything to hurt Isabel and Sophie. They are," her voice broke slightly, "they are like the daughters I never thought I'd have." Edward felt as if someone had placed an iron fist around his heart and was squeezing it mercilessly. "Chloe, I have been a coward and a fool. I accused you without evidence. I hurt you for no reason, and I almost destroyed the happiness of my own daughters because of my paranoia and my stupid pride." At that moment, Mrs. Esperanza appeared in the doorway, leaning on her cane. Despite her physical fragility, there was a strength in her eyes that made Edward feel like a child being scolded by his grandmother. "You must be the father of these little angels, Mrs. Esperanza said, with a voice that combined maternal warmth with unwavering firmness. "I am Esperanza Harrison, Chloe's mother." Edward respectfully approached the older woman. "Mrs. Harrison, I have no words to apologize for the pain I have caused your daughter. Chloe is. She is extraordinary. She is the best person who has entered our lives since we lost my wife." Mrs. Esperanza's eyes softened slightly. "Mr. Montgomery, my daughter has cried every day since you fired her. Not because of the loss of the job, although we need the money for my medicine. She has cried because she believed she had disappointed these precious girls she loves with all her heart." The words hit Edward like hammer blows directly to his soul. "Madam, if you'll allow me, I want to make sure you have the best medicine, the best doctors, everything you need. And I want Chloe to know that she not only has her job back, I want her to know that she is part of our family." Isabel and Sophie exchanged triumphant glances. Their plan had worked better than they had dreamed. "Daddy," Isabel said with the seriousness of a judge, "before Chloe decides to forgive you, you have to promise her something very important." "Anything, princess, anything. You have to promise her that you'll never yell at her again without listening first, that you'll never assume ugly things about her, and that you'll trust her as much as we trust her." Edward knelt in front of his 8-year-old daughter, feeling a mixture of pride and humility that overwhelmed him. "Isabel, I promise all that and more. I promise I will be the man you deserve as a father, and that Chloe deserves as an employee, as family." Chloe slowly approached, wiping a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Mr. Montgomery, I also have to apologize to you." "You? For what?" "For not having been more open with you about the problems I was going through. When the girls asked me questions about money or business, I should have come to talk to you directly instead of just answering as best I could." Edward shook his head vehemently. "No, Chloe, you have nothing to apologize for. Absolutely nothing. The mistake was entirely mine." Sophie, who had been observing this adult conversation with the typical impatience of her 5 years, finally exploded. "You already said sorry. You already forgave each other. Now you can hug, and we can all go home together." Sophie's brutal simplification made all the adults present laugh through their tears. Sometimes the deepest wisdom comes from the most innocent perspective. Edward extended his arms towards Chloe, and after a moment of hesitation, she stepped closer. The hug they shared was different from any hug Edward had given since his wife's death. It wasn't romantic, but it was deeply meaningful. It was the hug of someone receiving back a lost family member. "Welcome home, Chloe," Edward whispered. "Please, please, forgive me." "You are already forgiven," Chloe replied, and in her voice there was a sincerity that healed something broken in Edward's soul. The journey back to Montgomery Manor became a caravan of 2 vehicles. Edward insisted that Mrs. Esperanza also accompany them, at least for the day, so she could see where her daughter worked and get to know the girls she loved so much better. In Edward's car, Isabel and Sophie couldn't contain their excitement. They had achieved something that seemed impossible. They had reunited their broken family. "Daddy," Isabel said as they watched Chloe's car following them in the rearview mirror. "Are you proud of us?" Edward felt as if his heart would explode with emotion. "Princess, There are no words in any language that can express how proud I am. What you did today was the bravest, most loving, most incredible thing I have ever seen in my life. We were very smart, Sophie added proudly. We planned everything. Isabelle made maps and everything. Maps? Edward looked at Isabelle in the rearview mirror. You planned this whole expedition? Isabelle nodded with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. I took notes of everything Helen said about where Chloe lived. I drew maps, saved money, and convinced Sophie to be brave with me. Edward had to blink several times to hold back the tears that threatened to blur his vision as he drove. His daughters had shown more determination, more emotional intelligence, and more courage than he had shown in years. You know what? Edward murmured. I think you two are officially the most extraordinary girls in the entire world. When they arrived at Montgomery Manor, Helen was waiting at the main entrance, wringing her hands with anxiety. Seeing the girls get out of the car safe and sound, she ran towards them with open arms. My girls, dear God, you gave me such a scare, Helen cried, hugging them tightly. Never, ever do something like that again. But when Helen saw Chloe get out of the second vehicle, her expression changed completely. Her eyes filled with tears of pure joy. Chloe, is that really you? Helen whispered. Hello, Helen, Chloe replied with a trembling smile. The girls came to find me. Helen looked alternately at the girls, Edward, and Chloe, trying to process what she was seeing. It means Chloe is back home? Forever, Edward confirmed. Helen began to cry openly, hugging Chloe as if she were her own daughter. Thank God, this house wasn't the same without you. The girls, Mr. Edward, we were all lost. At that moment, Edward's phone began to ring. Seeing the name on the screen, his expression hardened slightly. It was Richard, his brother. Edward, I heard the girls were missing. Are they okay? They're perfectly fine, Richard, and I have news for you. Edward proceeded to tell his brother the whole story, how Isabelle and Sophie had overheard his phone conversation, how they had been the sources of the questions about money, and how Chloe had been completely innocent from the beginning. The silence on the other end of the line was long and uncomfortable. Edward, Richard finally murmured, I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful with my conversations. Richard, we all make mistakes, but I made the biggest mistake by not trusting someone who had proven herself trustworthy for 2 whole years. After hanging up, Edward found Chloe in the backyard, exactly in the same place where the horrible scene had occurred a week earlier. But now, instead of tears of pain, Isabelle and Sophie laughed as they showed Mrs. Esperanza the unfinished sandcastle they had left. You know what's the most incredible thing about all this? Edward asked Chloe as they watched the girls play. What? That my 8 and 5-year-old daughters taught me more about love, forgiveness, and bravery in 1 week than I had learned in 45 years of life. Chloe smiled, wiping a tear. Mr. Edward, they learned those lessons because they already carried them in their hearts. You and your wife raised them well. Marie-Helen would be proud of them, Edward murmured. And I think she would be proud of me for finally doing the right thing. That night, for the first time in a week, Montgomery Manor once again sounded like a real home. There was laughter in the dining room, lively conversations, and that warm feeling that only a united family can create. During dinner, Mrs. Esperanza told stories of when Chloe was little, making Isabelle and Sophie laugh until their stomachs hurt. Edward watched the scene with a gratitude so profound that it hurt his chest in the most beautiful way possible. Chloe, Edward said when they were serving dessert, I want to make you a proposal. Everyone at the table fell silent, expectant. Instead of just being Isabelle and Sophie's nanny, would you officially like to be part of our family, not just as an employee, but as the older sister I never had, as the aunt my daughters deserve, as the daughter I know Mrs. Esperanza is proud to have? Chloe was speechless, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Does that mean you're never going to leave again? Sophie asked, her eyes shining with hope. That means, Chloe replied, that you've gained an Aunt Chloe for life. Isabelle and Sophie screamed with joy, jumping from their chairs to hug Chloe from both sides. But that's not all, Edward continued. Chloe, I want Mrs. Esperanza to move here too. We have plenty of spare rooms, and I want her to receive the best possible medical care. You two have taken care of us. Now we want to take care of you. Mrs. Esperanza covered her mouth with her hands, overwhelmed by the unexpected generosity. Mr. Edward, the older woman murmured, we don't know how to thank you. Mrs. Esperanza, Edward replied with a genuine smile. You gave us the most valuable thing there is, A person who loves our daughters as if they were her own. We are the grateful ones. A week later, Montgomery Manor had been completely transformed. Not only had it regained its warmth, but it had gained new dimensions of love and joy. Mrs. Esperanza had settled into the first-floor guest room, where she received daily visits from medical specialists Edward had hired. Her condition had notably improved with proper treatment, and the peace of mind of knowing her daughter was safe and happy. Chloe had agreed to move into the second-floor suite that had previously been a storage area, but which Edward had completely renovated. It wasn't just a room. It was a home within a home, where Chloe could have her private space, but still be an integral part of the family. Days later, Edward organized a special dinner. He had invited Richard and his family, Helen and her children, and had transformed the main dining room into a celebration hall. Tonight, Edward announced as everyone sat around the extended family table, "I want to toast to the two bravest people I know." Edward raised his glass, looking directly at Isabel and Sophie. "My daughters taught me that true love doesn't stop at obstacles, that family isn't defined by blood, but by heart, and that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can create the biggest miracles." To Isabel and Sophie, Richard toasted, raising his own glass. "The girls who saved their entire family." To Aunt Chloe, Sophie added, raising her juice glass, "who always forgives us everything and loves us even when we're mischievous." To Daddy, who learned to say sorry, Isabel declared with wisdom that went beyond her 8 years, and to families who come back together when we least expect it. As everyone toasted and laughed, Edward felt a familiar presence. For a moment he could swear he saw Marie-Helen sitting in the empty chair at the end of the table, smiling with approval at the extended family that had grown around their daughters. Weeks later, when the new family routine had fully settled, Edward found a note on his desk. It was from Isabel, written in her careful second-grader handwriting. "Dear Daddy, thank you for being brave too. Mommy would be proud that our family is now bigger and happier than before. I love you, Isabel P.S. Sophie wants to add that Aunt Chloe makes the best sandwiches in the whole universe, including other planets." Edward read the note 3 times before carefully putting it in his desk drawer next to his most cherished family photographs. In the garden, he could hear the laughter of Isabel and Sophie as Chloe taught them to plant new flowers in the same place where they had once built sandcastles. Mrs. Esperanza was sitting on the wrought iron bench, knitting something he suspected would be a sweater for one of the girls. Edward walked to the window and observed the scene with a gratitude so profound that it filled every cell of his body. He had been about to destroy his family's happiness because of pride and paranoia. But his daughters, with their pure love and extraordinary bravery, had saved not only Chloe, but the entire family. "Thank you, Marie-Helen," Edward whispered to the clear sky, "for giving us these incredible girls who know how to love better than any adult." In the garden, Sophie looked up at the window where her dad was and blew him a kiss. Edward returned it, feeling his heart was complete for the first time since he had been widowed. The Montgomery family had learned that the most painful mistakes can become the most beautiful blessings when love is strong enough to overcome pride, and when the bravery of the little ones can heal the deepest wounds of the adults. Isabel closed her diary that night with a final entry. "Mission accomplished. Aunt Chloe is home forever. Grandma Esperanza is healthy. Daddy learned to say sorry, and we proved that little girls can do very big things when they truly love." End of the perfect story. And there really was no better way to end the most beautiful story ever lived at Montgomery Manor.